Hello everybody, and welcome to this first recorded video discussion of 2023 as part of the RICS Tech Partner Programme. My name is Andrew Knight. I've been with RICS for over 11 years, nearly 12 years now, and my role is to look at the whole impact of data and technology right across the built and natural environment. And with over 110,000 members qualified worldwide, working right across the property and land lifecycle all the way through planning, development, land acquisition, construction, brokerage, valuation, asset management, property management, building management. It's a really huge, wide palette upon which data and technology is having a profound effect. And indeed, our members also work across a number of different asset types, whether that's land itself, rural, commercial, residential, alternative infrastructure. So once again, a huge impact in terms of those different asset types and how data and technology can help the profession. And I'm really pleased today to have Frederik joining me from Acquirepad. So Frederik, do please join me.
Hi, Andrew. Thank you for being here. It's a real pleasure.
Pleasure to have you on. And before we get into the bits and bytes and what Acquirepad is up to, it'd be great to have a bit of a kind of backstory about you and your personal journey and the origin story of Acquirepad itself.
Yeah, sure. Me myself, I was born and raised in Berlin. Originally, I've been drawn into real estate very early on. Almost as a baby, I was like sniffing the dust from the building sites. She's an architect, and I also worked in her office. She was focusing on energy retrofitting back in the days already before ESG became the main thing. And then I decided to move on into my bachelor's degree in facility management, and then later I transitioned more into the commercial side for a real estate master in real estate management. And then my first job was actually at Cushman & Wakefield, actually a company that's more English, and where I was starting as a broker in the capital markets team. And then I actually moved on to the digital side as well, similar where you were in RICS. I was working at CBRE in the digital transformation department for continental Europe, as the UK, Ireland business is kind of separated. And around that time when I was working at CBRE, there was also the time where I came up with the idea around Acquirepad. Back then it was called a bit different. It was more like a project, kind of like a research project. I was reading an article in the Washington Post about a product called Gemini, which is from Goldman Sachs, I believe. And it's still running actually. And that's where I kind of came up with the idea. And then I tried to research more about the market. It took actually quite some time. And then after some time I decided to leave CBRE, then moved on more to the technology side, which was kind of like my part or the part of my 5-year plan that I drawn up during my studies. I was kind of like sketching out 2 years in a traditional business, capital markets or asset management, moving on to kind of like a transitory position, which is like digital transformation, and then moving on eventually to the real prop tech business, so to say.
So in terms of the origin story of Acquirepad itself, how old is it? How did you really kind of get going in terms of actually creating a firm rather than a project, as you described it?
Yeah, it was quite a journey, I would say. Originally I started out like talking to a lot of people, getting more into the nitty-gritty part of real estate transactions, investment management. Obviously, I knew a lot about the work itself from Cushman, but then I talked to more people on the ground who had more experience, kind of sketched out the market, better understanding the problem itself. And then when I had kind of like an idea what it could be, I was looking at different ways and angles, like where could I build? Can I build in part-time? When do I have to go full-time? And then I eventually came up with the idea that I would look for a job that provides me certain skills. So I ended up actually looking for a job in product management, because in my opinion, product management is kind of like usually the founders are the first product managers. They sketch out the whole business and so on, right? In Europe, product management is kind of a concept that's not very good understood in the tech side today, but it's fairly well understood in the US, where it's kind of originated from. And so I looked for a job in product management, and during that 6 months time, I kind of worked every weekend, and after my normal day job, I worked on the idea, concepted a bit, talked to a friend like my co-founder Victor, who then later joined, and then like we conceptually worked on an idea, sketched out MVPs, the usual stuff, right? Canvases and so on, everything that you kind of can use in order to nurture your idea. Obviously, reading a lot. I became a really big fan of reading, actually. I think reading content is much more beneficial than just like talking about it, I would say. And around that time, we then looked for another third founder, and then we looked at YC, so Y Combinator that is. It's kind of the biggest accelerator and company builder, maybe also one of the most successful in the world. Located in Silicon Valley, they coined companies like Airbnb, Coinbase, Twitch, or actually former founders of Twitch are now or have been presidents. They just changed this year on the 1st of Jan. And around the time, they also have kind of Tinder for founders. And it's called Founder Match, I think. And they also have a in-house Facebook. It's kind of off topic, but it's called Bookface. And there we found Manuel, which is our co-founder, third co-founder, and he's responsible for the technology. And with him, we built within like a month, we built a very basic MVP, which we test with like clients. It was kind of like ongoing process. And then in December, well, now 2 years ago, I quit my job full-time, and then I transitioned full-time into working on the idea itself. And then we found out about a funding program which is called Exist. It's kind of run by the government in Germany. It supports founders who have a connection to science. Because my master thesis was I was writing it at SAP about machine learning and real estate. Manuel, he was doing at the time his PhD at the DLR, which is kind of like German NASA, if you want. And Victor, he was working on his PhD at Uni Regensburg, which is it's kind of like Reading maybe, very focused on real estate, strong record on real estate. And he was also working on machine learning. And that's how we tied everything together and like submitted our application, which in the end got through, and happy to receive the funding. And that's also our financial background from which we're currently financing ourselves.
Good. So in terms of, you mentioned earlier about sort of problem solving, and for me, it's always a classic question I ask is, what does Acquirepad solve as a problem? So thus, what is the product? And in terms of clients, who are you solving problems for?
Yeah, so usually when it comes to problem solving, it kind of depends which segment you're in, B2C or B2B. Sometimes in B2C, you solve very novel problems because you build something that hasn't been there, right? But usually in B2B, it's often more like process innovation. So you improve things. And the things that Acquirepad improves is just how real estate investors can source and sell properties. So kind of like the acquisition, disposition of properties, that's what we're kind of improving. And the way we're improving it is through a single digital platform that covers end-to-end transactions, from the sourcing, identifying buyers for the sell side, and identifying properties, obviously, for the buy side, and then moving through the entire qualification underwriting phase until we move to the exclusivity, which is usually before the proper due diligence starts. That's where we kind of end at the moment. And obviously, our vision is to be much bigger and move further into the transaction, and then also improve certain elements of the transaction itself, right? So for us, it's all about providing efficiency and control to the investment manager itself. Because one of our key hypotheses is that the investment manager is the better broker, and we want to provide the tools the investment manager needs to become this better broker, if you want so. And that's kind of one of the goals of Acquirepad.
And obviously, everybody's looking to bring a product out that has a level of uniqueness to differentiate itself. How are you kind of covering the different parts of the transaction process to make that proposition different and distinctive?
Yeah, so the general idea of a marketplace in real estate is nothing that's super new. Like in the UK, I think you have Purple Bricks. In Germany, we have ImmoScout. Basically, in every country, there's something for the B2C market, for residential properties mainly. Rather small properties, usually flats, or it's rather small houses. Especially in Germany, there hasn't never been a B2P marketplace. And for example, in the US, there's something coming up. And one of the key USPs that we have is that we start from the sell side. So we provide all the power to the seller. That's how it's also traditionally done in professional brokerage services. So the seller decides who the property is going to be offered to, and so on. And we also learned through many discussions with our customers, I think until the point we started to code, we talked about 120 companies already, interviewed them on like a regular basis about the problems and so on, that we understood that not only the matching is important, like matching demand and supply, but also supporting the transaction itself. And right now we're the only platform that really does that. So we automatically create or we support the creation of digital teasers and investment memorandums, which can be controlled, which data point is shown to which party at which point. So very granular control about the data and information flow. And then we also incorporated digital NDAs and digital LOIs to further improve the efficiency gains also in the phase once potential buyers have been identified and they say, okay, this property is interesting for us, let's look further into it. We also included a digital data room, which is nothing new, but through COVID, these things have become like a staple for most investment managers, especially on the professional sphere. And that's what we all put together basically into one platform. And that's one of our key USPs. Additionally to that, we're implementing machine learning to our matching so that we can learn through the use of our users to better improve matches and also understand which properties are interesting for which target audience, and then thus support also the sell side in better identifying potential buyers, right? So kind of trying to mimic the perfect broker, if you want.
And now, as you mentioned a bit earlier, to some extent, you're not looking at a new process per se, a new market. So given that you're effectively trying to optimize and improve and add value to an existing marketplace, what is the market for solutions like Acquirepad? Because one could argue there's already a, quote, functioning real estate market for commercial real estate. Where's the market? Where are the clients? Where's the demand for this?
Yeah, so at the moment we're focusing on the German market because it's kind of very distinctly different to, for example, the UK market or the US market. They're all very transparent in terms of what is happening, accessibility of data, and so on. And in Germany, it's quite different. Germany has some nuances. That's where we're focusing on. And the market here is mostly in the B2B segment, where we focus on rather small to mid-cap investments. So in Germany, it would mean 5 to 40 mil in terms of deal volume that we're looking for. And additionally, to that, it's kind of like more looking in towards the investments between professional parties. So we're not really looking into this B2C driven investments where like person A is selling a 3 million house in some city to person C, but it's more like investor selling to investor, right? And it's a very professionalized process. And usually, as you kind of mentioned, it already is being done through brokers. But the problem here is that investors don't have an alternative, right? So they kind of either they do it themselves or they rely on a broker, but there's no alternative to it. It's not like there's like an option C, right? And eventually Acquirepad is now the option C, and they can use Acquirepad as an alternative to the broker, which is much more efficient, much more precise, and way cheaper. And that's the most important things for usually our investors or our customers is they have a something that they don't really trapped in, because brokers, they have kind of a good market positioning for the past years, and they've been exploiting that market position in a way that's not really beneficial to the investors, but obviously beneficial to the brokers, right? And we're trying to change it and give back the power to the investment managers and investors themselves to be more, to not be kind of like catched in or locked in by the brokers.
I understand. We did a survey actually towards the end of 2022 to all the tech partners around kind of barriers to adoption. One of the big issues that still comes up is many applications, not all, but being unable to really kind of demonstrate a very clear ROI. I mean, is that something you've looked at in terms of how you can present that part of your story to the market?
Yeah, I mean, we're not like 2 of 3 people in our team. We know real estate, we know especially B2B real estate, and we understand it's a game about yields and making money, right? Like in the end, the investment of real estate is supposedly ROI driven. So that's especially interesting for us because in the end, we want to satisfy the problems and the needs of our customers, because only then we will get paid. And depending on the value we provide, we can get a certain chunk, right? And with our current revenue model that we have, which is also commission driven, and we chose it because it's a staple in Germany and everyone understands it. So we just chose to use it as well. At the moment, usually when we demonstrate the calculation is like, if an investor buys through us one property, they already paid for the use for the next 20 years, basically, of using Acquirepad. And it's because our difference between the average broker fee that a normal broker would get, which is like 2 to 6%, depending on the deal size, could also sometimes be lower, depending on the deal size. For us, it's always straight 0.2%, which is in comparison super slim. And in the average case, it's like a gain of 10x that the investor gains just in the cost benefit, without even the efficiency gains that they get through automated screening and so on.
Good. Now, obviously, I think you mentioned earlier a lot of conversations with the marketplace and clients. What would you highlight as some of the key insights you've learned? I mean, despite the fact you've got already had a background in the industry, what have the kind of been the light bulb moments when you've spoken to potential clients or clients and thought, yes, that's another feature, another piece of value that we either need to build in or emphasize more when we're talking to the market?
Yeah. I mean, obviously, we already understood certain aspects, especially Victor. He was really very early on. I think he was one of the first people who looked actually at PropTech. He was also writing the first property technology report for CBRE Germany back in the days. And we really understood already from the get-go how can valuation aspects be more data-driven and so on, like all these things, right? And then you also know that there's lots of possibilities. But the few things that have struck us was more from the customer conversations per se. So sometimes we asked usually we tend to ask very open questions just from a discovery perspective. Makes sense to not have your own bias influencing the decision making or the answers of the customers or interviewees. So we rather ask like questions: why are you using brokers, right? Why do you do the transaction like this? And sometimes people were, with their reactions, was really interesting because people were like leaning back in their chest. Actually, I never asked me this question, right? And this kind of shows that the real estate industry or certain people in the real estate industry, they never had the need to question themselves. And once you question themselves, and once you try to figure out what are better alternatives, they actually realize quite quickly this could be done differently. And one of the most important reactions that we had: I think your idea makes a lot of sense, and I also thought about it many times. And I was wondering, why doesn't it exist, right? And this is really nice because one of our key mantras is also from YC. It's something called build something people want, because eventually if people want it, they will use it, they get value from it, and then you can also get paid, right? If you build something for people who don't have a problem and who don't want your solution, you end up in a sales hustles where you always try to push something to people who don't have any need for it, right? And those were the things that kind of struck me with our client discussions. It was really, really cool.
No, as you say, there's always that danger that and I think PropTech has fallen into this trap of, build a solution and looking for a problem. As you say, you need to genuinely deliver some value. So looking back over the last 5-6 months, what sort of traction, what sort of early adopters, what sort of adoption are you getting?
Yeah, so originally we started with like friends, basically. especially for the submission phase of our Exist program. Since October, since the expo, basically, we're really live and we're really talking to customers. We're out there. Since then, we have accumulated 70 customers, or 70 companies who are active on Acquirepad. We have a total of 850 companies in our database, which can already be accessed for users. So the way it works, basically, if you, for example, decide to sell something in London, you would type in all the property details, and then we would recommend potential buyers, basically shortlist, and then you can pick and choose who you want to talk to and who you want to send the property to. And it can basically be 0 people, could also be 1 person, could also be the entire list, basically, but it's always a minimum requirement in terms of quality control, so to say. So it's not like you can send to 850 companies. It's more like you can probably send up to, depending on the asset class, it's in residential, it's bigger. In traditional commercial real estate asset classes like office and retail, it's rather shorter, so it's maybe up to 50 people. And we do this analysis based on 1,700 investment profiles, which I think is something fairly unique for the German and DACH region. It's called, in German, it's called Ankaufsprofil, basically a shopping list, but a very precise shopping list with a lot of features on the asset class, on the property type, on the conditions, and so on. And these points, that's what we're matching, actually. And per acquisition profile, we have on average 30 data points. So we're analyzing, every property is analyzed on 45,000 data points, basically. And at the moment, we have roughly 25 properties live, which have a combined value or volume of like roughly 240 million. And we're not even live. So at the moment, we are in our single player mode. In the marketplace business, this is usually the phase where marketplace is not fully ready in terms of putting both sides together. Actually, end of this month, early February, we're moving into our multiplayer phase, where we then can allow the users who have already uploaded 25 properties, they can send it out to potential customers, and then they will receive emails, which is a short statement about why they received this property and what kind of property it is, basically. And that's where we're currently at. And then further down the year, we will be looking to advance more to the DACH regions, so Austria and Switzerland, and then,
and obviously you want to build a classic flywheel, sort of benefit of network and size of marketplace that you build. I mean, more broadly, where do you see technology moving in the investment management space? Because as you say, people have been doing the same kind of thing for a long time, and obviously technology is able to challenge and improve processes. Well, what do you see as happening perhaps over the next few years in that space?
Yeah, I think generally investment management in real estate is sometimes similar to other types of investment management in different asset classes. Different asset classes have been more data-driven, I would say. And I think the real estate investment management will become more data-driven as well. Usually, a lot of the trends in PropTech came from the US, and the US is usually 4 to 5 years earlier or quicker in adapting technology. Obviously, also due to regulation. I think at the moment we're at the pivotal stage of PropTech adoption, because we, on the one hand side, in certain areas we see a contraction in, not really in adoption, but in the number of players. So we see a lot of acquisitions and takeovers in certain areas. I think in real estate investment management, we're pretty early on. So we see much more research, much more data-driven research, more applications that we see in different areas. Through COVID, we've seen a huge acceptance in data rooms, digital signatures, and so on. Also video calls. I mean, back in the day, pre-COVID, I would probably have to come to London to do the podcast, right?
Yeah.
And nowadays, these things become fairly common. So a lot of different niches we see tech entrenching into the main business, basically. And I think in about 2 to 4 years, we see major parts of the basically investment ecosystem being transformed into more digital. It doesn't have to be flashy startup things, but just like more data is being used and consumed by companies to make decisions. because decisions become more complex. The world's becoming a more complex place, especially with ESG, geopolitical tensions. You just need to be basically more precise in your decisions, right? And the way to be more precise in your decisions is having more information at hand.
Yeah.
Essentially, data is just information. So I think data will be essentially in making decisions in the future, making better decisions, being better than your peers. I think having a marketplace that allows you to be more data-driven is the thing that kind of like underpins everything.
Indeed. And Frederik, you mentioned ESG a few seconds ago. How are you going to integrate that? Because certainly I know in the UK market particularly, and I know it's the same across many markets now, there's a real sense that we lack the ESG data to reflect in valuations, to reflect in potential retrofit costs, to reflect on potential premiums or brown discounts, or indeed potentially stranded assets. Where are you seeing that in terms of your product, but more generally in terms of that availability, as you said, of yet more data that helps people make smarter decisions?
Yeah, I think ESG, especially for us, there's two main aspects for us that's interesting in ESG is the environmental part and the governance part. Especially the governance part for us is kind of interesting because we believe in a very professional manner of doing business, and that's why also we looked at RICS always as a big guiding star in terms of values and so on. That we look to better qualify buyers and sellers through governance, KYC checks, KYB checks, and all these things that have to be done. But usually, if you're honest, a lot of people don't do them very good. And on the environmental side, it is that we want to implement certain features that allow buyers to better qualify fairly easily where these investments are along certain aspects. So, for example, the Paris Agreement or the CRREM pathways or these kind of things. Like, where is this asset stranded in X amount of years? Is it good in terms of LEED or BREEAM or DGNB certification? Like these kind of things. What's the energy source? What's the heating source? Like these kind of things, they can be automatically screened. And if you're an investor who has a fairly big emphasis on sustainability, you can even change the algorithm in this way for you personally, that you say, okay, for me, I want to see properties that are, or I want to rate sustainability higher than certain other aspects of the property, for example, location maybe. And by that, we're trying to support investors who want to invest in ESG compliant real estate quicker. And on the other hand side, we're also helping people who have like stranded assets, basically, right? So there's some investors who will focus on green assets, some investors who will focus on brown assets, making eventually the brown assets into green assets.
Exactly.
I think that's where we can really add value in terms of analyzing these data points quicker.
Indeed. So what do the next few months hold for you? Obviously, you're still in a real trajectory of growth here and as you say, going live. Well, what do the next 2 or 3 months look like for you?
Well, obviously, one of the main things for us is kind of like putting on the finishing touches on our multiplayer. So we have a couple of customers who are basically waiting in line for us to actually bring out this multiplayer, so they're actually able to send out the emails. At the moment, it's kind of like a free tool for them. They can analyze what's potential buyers and targets and so on. And so for us, at the moment, major milestone is Jan-Feb, basically, our go-to-market go live, if you want, of the multiplayer. And then throughout the first half of the year, we will look to further improve certain elements of the tool, basically implement different acquisition profiles for different asset classes, different teaser modules, basically for different asset classes. At the moment, we're already working with a partner on implementing research data for all of Germany. So this is more socioeconomic market data, location data that we will implement automatically into every teaser and every EM. And through that, customers can easily digest basically the investment opportunity. And then obviously one of the major things that we also want to do is implementing automated KYC or KYB checks, implementing a sustainability tool which will help customers evaluate sustainability. those are usually things that we don't build ourselves, but comes from integrations. And this is also one of the key things that we currently see is there's major adoption in a lot of parts of in real estate in terms of technology. And through that, we can add a lot of interesting features and solve a lot of problems that usually would be a point solution by someone into one product that kind of like helps in all of these individual situations.
Indeed. Well, it sounds like you've got a busy 2023.
Yeah,
Well,
it's going to be very exciting.
Well, it's been fascinating to talk, Frederik, and for today, thanks ever so much. But I look forward to catching up later in the year and see how things are going.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you for having me, and looking forward to the next one.
Indeed. Bye-bye now.
Bye-bye.